Hello, everybody. My name is Trevor Grimes, and welcome to the third episode of The Content Crowd, where we talk about not just creating content for the sake of creating, but creating content that actually resonates. And you know what? Is actually just enjoyable to create and to see. Today, I am here with my guest, who is also a content dork, and my colleague, Phil Pilalas. How's it going today, Phil?
It's going well. It's going well. Getting two things.
Yeah, sorry guys. We had a bit of a technical difficulty. Don't know what went wrong, but here we are. I
We
won't.
made it.
Yeah, we made it. Don't know what the deal was, other than I just switched browsers and it seemed to work. So we'll just hop right into it. I don't want to take up too much time. I want Phil to be able to be the star of the show. So yeah, Phil, let's do a quick intro about your current role and who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a fellow content dork, as you put it in the invite, at Scrappy ABM. I help companies say important things to important people and help get their message across in a way that makes sense for them. It's pretty
And
it's pretty pretty simple and complex at the same time.
yeah, I think messaging and content and branding and marketing and all these things can be very, very simple, and can also be incredibly difficult depending on who you're talking to and how you're creating. Which I think is a good segue into my first question, which is kind of asking about like a philosophy or a rule you swear by when it comes to creating content or just managing the content creation process.
A rule I swear by. I don't know if I swear by any specific rules. I don't know that there's too many rules that, from a content perspective, people should be following as like hard and fast rules because I think the content world and the way you speak to customers and how you get the message across is like ever changing.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know that I would subscribe to any specific rule per se. I mean, I'm sure there's like all the rules of language and all the rules of math,
Yeah.
stuff like that doesn't break. But ultimately, what does end up breaking down is like how society consumes information, and you have to be
Yeah.
able to adjust.
I'm with you on that, and that I don't. I will say, if maybe not a rule, but a guideline, I think is to have some sort of a point of view. I think that is like something that is super important that often gets overlooked, and this goes for, in my opinion, goes for businesses. Goes for entrepreneurs who are trying to build thought leadership. It goes for people who are trying just to create content themselves. I think a lot of times people get hung up on the what they want to create and maybe the distribution, and they don't realize that what's really the most important is having that point of view. And that's kind of how I try to go into each one of these episodes. Is I'm not here to ask questions for the sake of asking questions, and I don't want you to answer the questions for the sake of me asking question you answer, me ask a question you answer. Like, I may only ask you one question. Really, I'm just here to, I want to hear your point of view, and I think that's what's important. And I mean, especially when it comes to like creating content on LinkedIn, we can get hung up on, well, like, who cares about what I have to say, or why am I the authority on this? When we post content, we're
Mm-hmm.
being very, like me and you, I'm talking about me and you specifically, but for anybody, but when me and you create it, like, I feel like it come across as opinionated on the things we're talking about. Cause we're like, this is how you should do it. And this is why you should do it. And it's not necessarily that it means that this is how everybody should do it, but this is the point of truth that I believe in the idea. So this is my point of view, and I'm giving it to you, and you can try it out and see if it works for you or not. But I think that would be the rule that I would subscribe to if there was a rule, is just have that point of view and stick to it and kind of show people what that is.
Yeah, yeah. I think point of views are a bit of not a misnomer. I think they're underutilized because people think that a safe message is a good message, and
Yeah.
I think especially with like marketing, if you're saying things that elicit emotional responses, good ones, it's likely to elicit a negative response in somebody else.
Yeah.
But I think that like that's not the point per se, but it does mean that you are sharing a point of view that is specific and that
Yeah.
also has like some teeth.
Yeah.
Because I've seen marketing programs that go through 1,000 iterations, and all of the real special point of view stuff gets kind of like removed
Yeah.
because people want to be safe. They don't want to offend somebody. They don't want somebody to think about it negatively. But if you reverse that and say like, yeah, but the group of people we want to talk to, they're going to get a much more good or pleasant response out of this. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people miss when they're thinking about point of view. Point of
Yeah.
view, not everybody's going to like it. Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to agree with it, but you have to have it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, your message really says nothing.
It's kind of like a friend to everybody is a friend to no one. And
Yeah.
if you're trying to, play the middle and be everyone's friend, eventually you're going to be friends to nobody. And that doesn't have to be, as serious as like a social issue. But even even with this, like having a point of view in like a campaign or even just like your messaging. So I think that's a super good piece of advice. What would you like? How would you guide somebody who's maybe their product isn't super like divisive in that way? Like, how do you help somebody who is, I don't know, just creating a simple like maybe they're like a payment processor, for example, like how do you create a point of view in that? Because that seems like a pretty cut and dry kind of thing. We know why payment processors exist and why we should do that. So how do you suggest like giving somebody with a product like that a point of view?
Yeah, that's a interesting question because a lot of times, especially from a B2B perspective, you think like a process is a process, a thing that does a thing is a thing that does a thing. But there's like just the example of like a payment processor, like there's probably hundreds of them, I imagine. And the big ones or the ones that end up having more success in the market are the ones that are solving a specific problem.
Yeah.
And whoever the founder is, whoever the CEO is solving a specific problem because they have a point of view about that from either experience or some other like reasoning behind like even starting it. And I think it's important to think about it in that way. Like, why did the founder start the company? Why is this payment processor like growing at whatever rate it's growing at? Why is it number 3, number 4, or whatever it is? Why is it a household name?
Yeah.
It's because they had a founder who was solving a specific problem because they had a point of view about that problem. So like it's really easy, especially in like when you're talking to customers who want to buy a thing and they say, well, we need all of these features and all of these bells and whistles that all the other payment processors have, or whatever solution it is. And sometimes that point of view, the reason the company started doing what it's doing kind of gets lost in the, well, we got to make sales or things like that. I'm not saying like you can't think about it in that
Yeah.
way all the time, but like you do have to kind of dig past like all of that and get to why did this company even get started?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Like, how do you give yourself a point of view? Like, just think about why you started doing the thing that you did.
Hmm?
Why did you create this product? And even if it was just like I want to make money, so I knew that this was a problem. There's still a problem there. You saw like
Yeah.
there's value in creating this product for some reason, whether you wanted to do more or you wanted to do less or you wanted to go after a certain segment. Like that's your kind of your point of view. That's where you can have a specific point of view that hits the right audience. Um, yeah, which is it's also interesting because like I don't know a whole lot about where like you come from in terms of how you got into content and how you got into things. I know you've worked in sort of different areas, like I think we all have, and sort of landed here. So I love to know, like, using that same anecdote you just gave us, what was the problem you were trying to solve? What was the point of view that led you into becoming a content writer or creating content versus doing sales or doing something else.
I suck at sales. That's why. I'm just kidding. That's my point of view. I'm terrible at talking to human beings. No, I think a lot of marketers start in sales. To me, that's a super interesting route because a lot of people get to talk to customers face to face. When you start like outright in marketing, you have to like force those conversations. So that's super interesting, but that's not the answer to the question. I think so. When we're talking about marketing communications, I originally went to school for broadcast comm. I wanted to be like the guy who made TV, the guy who made movies. You always have like grandiose plans of like becoming a show writer or something like that. But then like reality hit and it says like, okay, you can't really like go from nothing to something very quickly. And it was my desire to have a family. And so like, you got to figure out how to pay the bills. Not that marketing is like the end all be all of paying the bills, but it definitely got me there quicker than trying to work my way up in TV or radio. I'm not super into the front of camera stuff, but behind the scenes things, I love creating I love creating media. I love creating food. I love creating like art. So the creative aspect of it is kind of the piece that I'm super interested in, which I've managed teams. I've been head of marketing in quite a few places, but ultimately, like at the end of the day, marketers are creators. And I think that gives me specifically a lot of joy, a lot of fulfillment. Just seeing something that might be vague or something that might not quite be communicating what the company or person wants it to communicate, and turning that into something that human beings can like grab onto is super interesting to me. And I've always been,
and that's become like your mantra.
What's that?
Yeah. That's become like your mantra, right? You're like the brain dump. I'll condense your brain dump into a few words that make sense, guy. Right? Like that's sort of been your thing. So that's
yeah.
Did you when you were like thinking out the brain dump aspect of your offer? Like, is that the process you just walked me through? Is that kind of how you thought about it, or how did you land on the brain dump thing?
The brain dump piece. That is so ultimately like turning a subject matter expert's brain dump or the things they talk about or could talk about all day long into something meaningful for an audience is, I think, an underused aspect of marketing. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. Like one, it's hard to nail down subject matter experts, especially if they're founders or business leaders, because like you're squeezing 15-minute blocks into their day. So ultimately it's like, how do I take the person who cares the most about this subject or this company or this industry? How do I take all of the things they could talk about for hours and hours and hours and turn that into something meaningful for an audience? So I think that's like that's the piece that is the key, is like, how do you get a CEO, a founder, a sales leader to just talk about something for 45 minutes. And then that turns into 7 days of content for them, or a month, even depending on how long and how deep the conversation went.
What I love about that answer, one, you're giving me like a ton of ideas for like content to write after this, because I didn't formulate this question, or I didn't try to drive this conversation, but I feel like every question I'm asking you comes back to around to being like talking about your point of view. I think that's kind of what you just talked about, condensing that 5 hours of talking about this product to condense it into a point of view that the audience can resonate with and understand, and show how much this person deeply cares about solving this problem for them. So I just want to say, I don't know where that came from. It's just like naturally came around that, like having a strong point of view seems to be something that is missing a lot of times. And maybe even like when we're talking about like brand voice and brand tone, like maybe that's something that we're kind of missing out on, is not just coming up with like, am I technical or am I neutral or am I, what tense am I using, but also just like, what is my point of view in this? We get hung up on, we want to be more soft spoken, or we want to sound more helpful, but like all of that can kind of just not matter as much if you don't have a good point of view. And maybe we call that the bad breath of the brand. That could also be something
brand
something else we can
halitosis.
coin there. Yeah. So maybe that's it. Maybe the lack of point of view is like the brand halitosis, so to
I
speak.
think that
So
I like talking through that. That's like, I think that's a lot of marketing teams' problem, and even companies as a whole. Is like the marketing leader is not always like at the executive table. Unfortunately, they generally sit under like sales, especially at like medium or larger, medium to large companies. And a lot of times, like that disconnect between the conversations you're having at an executive level about like, why did we even start this thing? Like, why does it matter that we're doing the thing? Can sometimes get lost in like the imaginations of people who don't know that much about the whatever it is you're doing, because there is a certain degree of separation between like, if you've created your career around marketing, you probably haven't been in a specific industry for that long. Like for
yeah,
it, like imagine like, so I was a head of marketing at a safety company who did like fall protection, stuff like that. I didn't grow up. I didn't spend like 8 years as a salesperson in fall protection. But I was the marketer trying to explain like, okay, why does it matter that fall protection is a thing? So like there's a certain amount of separation there from like the reality of life as somebody who's putting together fall protection solutions and the guy who has to tell everybody why they need fall protection solutions.
yeah,
So like I think it's important to think about that. And one of the things that I've found is if you can get subject matter experts, going back around to the subject matter expert piece of it, if you can, as a marketer, find time to sit down with your CEO for 30 minutes a week,
yeah,
like what is that going to do to the experience you get and the opportunity that you get to hear directly from the horse's mouth? Like, why does it matter what we're doing?
yeah,
Why does it matter that people go home safe to their kids? Or why does it matter that businesses have an easier way to process, or a more financially like financially beneficial way of processing payments? So like to me as a marketer, like being able to get SME butts in seats and have a conversation with them every week, like that could be game changing for your marketer as a whole for a company.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's a that's a super good point, and also just a really good piece of advice. I used to work for a company that was employee owned, and I was doing marketing in house, and part of that was to be the head of sort of the employee ownership committee. And I remember that being kind of like what you're describing. It was a little bit of a struggle for me in the beginning because I had to really get my head in the idea of like, okay, what does being an employee owner like actually mean to me? Like, what do I actually care about? And then how do I communicate that to, how do I communicate that to the rest of the team, the rest of the employees? But that's a little bit easier because I know directly how that affects me. So it's a different idea when you are trying to or not a different idea, but a different hurdle when you're trying to figure out what does it mean for somebody who cares about safety. What are those kind of things? But yeah, that talking to the CEO, talking to, if you can talk to somebody who's over product, talking, I mean, even just talking, if you have a sales team, if you can just talk to a salesperson, once a week, or talk to multiple ones a week, and just find out like what kind of questions are people asking, what kind of what's the first hurdle when you start trying to sell to them or work that product, and they're like, well, hold on, like, well, I don't know if I, figuring out those kind of things are incredibly beneficial for somebody who is in the seat of, I've got to communicate this product that I know nothing about. I would never even use it. I've never worked in, you said never worked in safety. I didn't work in safety, selling safety sensors or whatever for 8 years. And now I can take that. You've got to very quickly grab everybody's knowledge. And I don't think the inability to do that necessarily makes you a bad content writer or anything like that, but definitely doing that and then having the ability to quickly put yourself into the shoes of somebody you'll never meet and probably never meet. And, if you can acquire that skill or get really good at seeing things that way, that's a quick, that's a fast pass to being able to communicate that point of view more efficiently. And I mean, even so, it's sometimes it's not even meeting with somebody that you might actually work with or use it. Sometimes it's listening to YouTube videos. That has helped me in so many projects, is just listening, finding podcasts that are about that subject. And again, it might be hard to find a podcast about safety sensors or whatever that may be, but there's something out there. There's a safety video out there somewhere. There is a brochure somewhere, and sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging and get yourself into that. But
there's some guy who has 150 followers on YouTube who's super nerding out on this thing that just puts out videos and that nobody watches, but is full of information. So there's a ton of avenues.
This may be a hard question to answer, but let's say you've got somebody they're working on this right now. They're trying to put together a brand voice or a brand guide or some sort of communication messaging framework for, they just started a new job and they're in the middle of that. How do you either fine tune to make sure that point of view and that voice stays in the guide when you're done with it, that rounds of feedback don't mess it up? Or how do you, what steps do you take to checklist to make sure that the point of view is staying and the message is going to resonate correctly?
I think just like any marketing that you do, you always want to have attribution or some sort of metric to go back to say hey, this is working or this is not working. I think it's very similar way you should be designing your brand voice and guys, not and that's a huge thing we could probably talk for hours about, is why do things end up in brand guides and voice and tone guides? It's probably because somebody feels like they need to have this type of voice or this type of tone. So that's a whole nother live podcast or live session in itself, is why do things end up in a brand and voice and tone guide? But I think going back to that conversation piece of it's what are customers saying about why they care about your product specifically? Why do your best customers stay your best customers? And why do they continue paying for your service? Or why do they continue to buy more? What parts of it do they not like? Because that sometimes is just as important as the things they do like. What don't they like? How do they talk about your product specifically? How do they think about it? What words do they use to describe it? And then kind of bumping that up against what the CEO or what the founder or what the leadership within the organization tells you about who they are specifically is also going to be an important piece of that. Because I think going back to getting subject matter experts to talk publicly about the thing they love and could talk about all the time is the closer you can get the brand and voice to how customers actually talk about you and the things that you do, how they talk about their own jobs and matching that up with how the CEO talks about things and how the CEO speaks. You're not going to have a CEO who's very rough around the edges, who might say things that are not exactly wise, sage, advisor type things, and then give your company a sage or a wise sage voice or something like that. Because anytime somebody hears the CEO speak, they're going to be that dude is very rough around the edge. and it doesn't match up with the brand that they're talking about. So like, I think it's super important to have all of those aspects of it. And then as a marketer or as a brand voice and tone guide creator, be able to point back to those things like, this is how you talk about it. This is how the customer talks about it. This is how the customer wants to consume information. Like, so
Yeah.
I think it's important. Like those are the metrics that you need to be able to point back to when you're developing a voice and tone. It's like, you say this, customer says this is how they talk about it. You don't want to like totally divorce the brand and tone and voice and tone of a company from like how actual humans talk about it. Cause we're not selling to a building. We're selling to the people who are in the building. I mean, like that's a very trite statement, but often overlooked because we imagine our brands and our products to be much more self-important than they actually are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's super good. That's a good place to start where you like, does the CEO talk this way about the product? And does the person you're reaching out also talk about this product? When you mentioned like Sage, were you dipping into like the what is it called, like brand archetypes kind of thing?
Yeah, like the archetype structure of like how you design a brand voice and tone guide.
Do
So
you
I'm not 100% certain on all the different archetypes.
okay. I was going to ask, is that something that you is that something you use or something that
Nope.
you go back to as like a framework?
No, I think those are good and valuable to kind of like put like shared language behind things.
Yeah.
But I also think that defining in those ways can sometimes trap you into things that you don't necessarily want. And
Yeah.
like a good brand voice tone guide writer is going to dig those things out of the company rather than just saying like, hey, what do you want to sound like?
Yeah.
Like, let's dig into those things and not just like, because sometimes CEOs feel differently about in their brain about products and services and companies than they actually really feel about like who they want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, it's good to those kind of things are good to maybe like share the shared like idea across the things. But yeah, I've never gotten super deep into like the brand archetype kind of stuff, and really like I've always kept it. Like when you're first starting out, I feel like a good brand guide can be one page. You can kind of hit everything for the most part that you
Yeah,
need to hit on like one page. Like I think sometimes this is going back to why are we adding this in there? You can make it go on for 20 pages if you wanted to break down every little thing. And that's different depending on how complex your product is and who your ideal customer is. But like just to get that, like you said, if you've got the rough and tumble CEO who's selling an indestructible flashlight. You don't want to have this wide sage, legs crossed like frog, sitting on a lily pad kind of thing. You want to have like this is a hard, you know flashlight to break. Like, those are the kind of things you have to think about. And I think that's a good point. I think like also going into that, one of my
that's a like a consumer product. A lot of times I think B2B companies like bypass that idea. Like consumer products are pretty easy. Like who's using it? What do they use it for? How tough does it need to be?
yeah.
B2B is sometimes a little different because it can be just like a vague belief about like who's actually buying your thing
Yeah.
and the problems that it solves. It's so it's subjective more than it is objective. Like if I'm a giant tire with a bunch of knobs, like, no, I'm not going to be put onto a Mercedes, Mercedes and driven down the street. Like, so I don't have to worry about like, what that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's how we end up with a lot of like all-in-one platforms that are like, they do one thing really well. And all the other stuff is kind of like, they kind of do okay at.
Yeah.
And it's because you've been, trying to, you lost that point of view at some point and tried to capture everybody.
Yep.
which is
I
always
totally derailed what you were saying.
no, it's okay.
Sorry
It's
about
okay.
that.
No, you're good. I was gonna say my little bit of advice for that. I think you had a much more structured answer. My little bit of advice is less structured and more of just like be like the devil's advocate about every single piece, like every single point. Like if you're going through a brand guide or if you've written something, it's like why, like ask why about every single thing. Like like we help these types of customers reach success. Okay, what does success mean? It means this. Okay, but what does it mean in this instant? Okay, and who is it actually for? And they use it because of this. Well, why would they use it? That like that's sort of like where I get super annoying, and I feel like on call sometimes people are like, "Why are you asking this many questions?" But it really helps dig out the deeper sort of I don't know, emotionally charged or emotionally driven parts of that will really help you stand out. Like again, that we're talking about point of view. If we're talking about just a payment processor, for example, like where's the where why would they choose you over the next competitor? Like what's that there? So that's my bit of like advice for anybody working on creating one is really ask a lot of questions and really try to understand why each thing does what it does.
The why.
And
What's the Simon? The why. What's the why?
yeah.
Why? Start with why. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we kind of went down a rabbit hole of like brand guides and things like that. But when it
It's the
comes to
seed
like,
of content.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, so when it comes to creating content, what is something that we're talking about strong opinions? So I want you to have a strong opinion on this, but what's like the one hill you'll die on when it comes to content creation or content in general?
Oh man, the hill I'll die on is like never trap yourself into a channel because you feel like that's where you should be or you shouldn't be. Especially as a business leader, I've heard business leaders say like, no, I don't want to be on TikTok, like stuff like that. And maybe you have like some moral reason you don't want to do that. Okay, that's fine and dandy. But ultimately, like, be where people consume content and figure out how to make that work for your
Yeah.
company, especially if you can reach your audience. Like, don't write off a platform because you, and again, like it, I've seen it, like it's not our brand voice. Like our brand voice, it goes back to that, like our voice and our tone won't allow us to be on this platform. Like, yes, it will,
Yeah.
but you just have to be willing to step outside of it a bit and be a little bit more flexible in like how you think about your brand voice. And again, like it's also scary because those different avenues and channels, like they demand different like requirements for content. You're going to
Yeah.
have to go out and either find somebody to create video. You're going to have to be willing to do it in-house and like potentially like not have the super polished piece. And like, that's fine. Like you also have to be willing to say like, yeah, this is good. This is good enough.
Yeah.
Like that sounds hard to say when you're
Yeah.
like a perfectionist or you want things to be just right going out, but like sometimes you just got to do the thing and learn as you go.
I mean, we've seen
Now
just to
that's
go.
a big wavy hill to die on, but
Yeah.
like
Well, no, I like the idea. Like, don't limit yourself to one platform. Like, I definitely think like you should become somewhat good or somewhat stable on one platform and don't try to do everything at once. But
yeah.
I agree. Like, there's a lane for everybody, even on TikTok to go talk about. I mean, there are people that are doing sales. There are people that are teaching you how to sell. I mean, I learned a lot about life insurance from people on TikTok who, like those are things there. Like, it's not just, I still hear it. It's like, I don't want to go on TikTok and do dances. And it's like, nobody dances on TikTok. Like nobody does that anymore. Like, yes, there's probably a small lane of like, I don't even know if like, the D'Amelio sisters are still popular, but if
I
like
don't
there's
even know who that is.
well, there's that lane of people who are dancing, but I mean, like if I go on my TikTok and look at my saves, they're like I've got it in folders of recipes, I've got it in tutorials on how to do like web stuff. I mean, I learned so much about video editing from somebody on like TikTok. Like there's just different ways, and And like you said, you have to kind of learn how to put it on every platform. You can't make a video and make it vertical and throw it on LinkedIn and throw it on Reels and throw it on Shorts and throw it on TikToks. You can do that, but it's going to be hard to get traction on there. The ones on TikTok would be better to have a talking head go over it versus this higher production thing or like a skip. But you know, we've seen there's a lot of crossover there, and that's what you kind of do. That's what I'm doing with this. Like I'm streaming to multiple platforms right now. I'm gonna see what works the best and what doesn't. You know, I'm gonna kind of like do some similar things, and this gives me an avenue to you know, post a like a recap of us talking, but also the avenue to just like do a talking head, you know, talking back to this, you know, and see how it works in different platforms.
Yeah.
So yeah,
why would I die?
Yeah.
Why would I die on a hill alone if my customers are on another hill? Like, like the hill you choose to die on might be the empty hill.
Yeah.
Like, and all you had to do is go like, oh, there's a hill that, you know, my customers are actually using. Like, why don't I just go over there to that hill instead of dying on this one?
Yeah, and to your point, like just put it out there, like be fast and get it up and see, and like take out your phone and record a quick video and post it to TikTok and see what happens. Like just talk about whatever you do and just see like the traction it picks up. Like it's probably a little bit crazy to honestly, like what would actually happen. Like you'd be surprised at how small of a community you need to for it really to be worth it. So I think that is, I agree with you on that. And I think like my new hill is probably like show up consistently, but do it in a way that is like the easiest way to do it. I used to say like, don't do too much at once because you won't do anything. And now I am into the thought of I'm still on that, but do it as easy as possible. This show, for example, like I'm going live, I'm going to hang up and that'll be it. I'm not like, I'll send you a Slack, but I'm not doing like a whole bunch of follow up, and I'll not probably post a few, but I'm showing up every week at this time to talk to somebody. I'm going to wear the same shirt. I'm going to wear my bootleg Content Crowd merch that I made, you know, some hat,
when are you going to have a merch store, man? I'll buy that mess.
Yeah. Well, this is, I made this myself. When I get somebody that can make it look nicer than I did, I will throw up a store, you know, so that's another avenue we'll go down. But even without all that, and I'm streaming to multiple platforms because I want to try it out. But honestly, like I don't have to stream anywhere else except here, and just do this and hang up the call and go about my day. And next week do it again. And at least people will know that every week on Thursday, like, you know, Trevor's coming here to talk to somebody that's more interesting and more talented than him. I want to see who he brings on next week. You know,
that is impossible
to be more interesting.
Yeah. More talented?
I thought you were saying more interesting. I don't know.
Oh, just more interesting.
Yeah, not more talented, pretty easy. More interesting, I don't know. You're kind of weird. So but anyway, thank you so much for being here, Phil. We started a little bit late, so I'm cutting you off a little early because I want to make sure I know you got a meeting coming up. We work together. I know what your calendar looks like. So,
just peek in there.
Yeah, I do appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I would love to have you on again, and we can dive deeper into some brand halitosis. I know you're 100%. Also streaming to your LinkedIn, but for my people, just let people know to come find you on LinkedIn. You got anywhere else that you want people to know about?
I have almost all but abandoned every other platform but LinkedIn. Just from a personal perspective.
You just said not to die on one hill.
That's my hill. That's my hill.
All right.
Maybe my audience isn't there, but
yeah. Well, that's all right. Thank you so much for being here, Phil, and thank everybody else for watching. And we'll see you next week for the next episode of the Content Crowd. Have a good one.
I've had a blast.
Thank you. Me too.